resource as well. All right. So, it's now my honor to introduce Peter Dunn, who was appointed the Chief Development Officer for the City of Worcester in May 2020, after previously serving 7 years in the department within various capacities. As Chief Development Officer, he leads the divisions of business development, housing development, neighborhood development, workforce development, and planning and regulatory services and special projects. He also serves as the Chief Executive Officer for the Worcester Redevelopment Authority, which is the entity that carried out the Polo Park project, in addition to owning and operating Union Station. Two of my favorite projects in the city, which is pretty awesome. He received his undergraduate degree from Roger Williams University and his MBA from Babson College. My fellow Rotarians, I give you Mr. Peter Dunn.
Well, great. Yeah, I have a few slides. I always think it's helpful to do some visuals as well as we talk about various things that are going on. And as I was putting this together, it's always really challenging to figure out kind of what direction to go in, because we could probably talk for over an hour about everything that's going on in the city, which is a good thing. But I've tried to focus on a couple of things that I think are most important right now and some upcoming projects that I think people will find interesting to be aware of. So.
Come on. Oh, here it comes. There it is. Just close it. There you go. Hey, Brad, do you want to get the lines over there, please?
So starting off, one of the things that was still fairly recent, we got information in August about the 2020 census. Obviously that was conducted over the last year, and it takes some time for them to take all that information and release it. And so even though we're in 2021, just recently got the kind of census 2020 figures. And so this is something that's, I think, huge for Worcester. Our population is now 206,518, which is the highest population in the history of the city. We're about to celebrate our 300th anniversary, so be on the lookout this year for some celebrations about our 300th anniversary, our tricentennial. We were over 200,000 once before in the city's history. In the 1950 census, we were 203,000. And then, of course, with the suburban flight and outsourcing of manufacturing that particularly impacted industrial cities like Worcester, our population declined throughout the next 3 decades, and then we've been kind of climbing back ever since. And so to put that into perspective, it's pretty significant since 2010. Our growth rate since 2010 is 14%. And how that compares, you look at Boston grew at 9.3%, Providence 7.2%, Portland, Maine 2.6%, Springfield just about 2%, and Hartford actually retracted a little bit at about 3%. So we're hands down the second biggest city in New England. We've kind of are now leaving Providence in the dust. There were a couple of census where we were neck and neck with Providence, but we're really kind of leaving Providence in the dust. And that's significant too, because capital cities obviously tend to have a little bit of an advantage when you have all of the state offices that are there and the kind of panache of a capital city. So really interesting figure there, really successful. As the city manager would say, people are voting with their feet. They're choosing Worcester. We're seeing populate sort of the return of cities since suburban flight. People want to be in urban centers now. But when you see that compared with some of these other urban areas in New England, really positive to see that people are choosing Worcester. So with that, obviously it's kind of, there's a lot of advantages that come with that, but there's also some responsibility and other things that we're considering now as we grow, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But first, most importantly, one of the things that has been our priority is housing. So I think one of the reasons why we've achieved that 14% growth rate is that we've had a concerted effort since 2010 to increase housing production. Folks might be aware of this is a statewide conversation as well. We're in sort of a housing crisis, that we have been underproducing housing as a state for some time, and so that has kind of caught up with us. And we've been, again, trying since 2010 to really try to facilitate housing development projects to help grow that population and also help provide those opportunities for people that are choosing Worcester to help try to alleviate some of the scarcity that we're seeing. If people know any realtors, or if you are a realtor, you know that apartments are getting hundreds of inquiries to rent that apartment. Home sales are going same day, over asking price, cash, no inspections. So really trying to make sure that our production and our supply side is meeting the demand side of the equation. So particular focus on that, not only over the last 10 years, but certainly as we move forward. One example of this is the former courthouse. So on Main Street, we sold this 3 years ago to Trinity Financial out of Boston. They just completed this year. I think last time I came, about almost 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, to this group, it was underway. And so this project is complete now, just as of the last 6 months. They're fully leased. So in less than 6 months, the 118 units that they've created there are now fully leased. It is a mixed income property, so there's some affordable units, there's some workforce units, which is kind of in the middle, which we would consider like 80% of area median income to 120% of area median income. And there's also some market rate units, which are just unrestricted, whatever the market will bear. So that's been a really great project. It was about a $60 million investment from Trinity Financial out of Boston, so really big commitment to the city of Worcester. And one of the things that we like, and we're going to be celebrating this at the end of this month, well actually first, this is a rendering. There's some really cool units, as you can imagine, that kind of a historic building, the character that presents, it gives the opportunity for some really interesting type of living situations in that building. So a lot of them are occupied now, so you might not get a chance to really go in and kind of see the units, but hopefully you'll meet somebody that lives there and be able to check out their units. But some really special spaces in there.
Condos or apartments?
These are apartments, and we can talk about condos and if you have a question about that later. The other element that we really like about this, because it's such a historic building and has been a civic building, we wanted to keep one area open to the public, and so they committed to creating a museum dedicated to Major Taylor. Hopefully people know the story of Major Taylor, a Worcester resident, who was one of the first black champion athletes. He was a world-renowned cyclist, used to train on George Street, so along Main Street, the very steep hill where Olympia Trophy used to be, used to train on that steep hill, and so they've created this museum. This is a rendering, but it looks just like this. We're celebrating a ribbon cutting grand opening on that October 29th on a Friday. And his great-granddaughter will be with us. She's not living locally anymore, but she'll be with us. So really special space there, especially with all the importance right now on equity and inclusion. So happy to see that space continue to be open to the public, and so you can continue to visit the courthouse even if you can't get into some of the residential units there. Next, also in Lincoln Square, one of our strategies going back to about 2008, 2009 was really trying to tackle these three big civic buildings that were in Lincoln Square that were vacant. So we had the courthouse, the Lincoln Square Boys Club, which that the latest time that it was occupied was part of the Worcester Vocational High School before they relocated across the street here. And so it's been vacant since the tech school no longer needed it. We sold that last year to Wind Development out of Boston. And it's a very challenging property because it's got limited square footage. It's a historic property, so you need to maintain the historic integrity. And there were only so many units. When you think about housing or even commercial space, there was only so much space in there that you could monetize and create income out of to make the numbers work on such a costly project. And so they have come up with a creative solution to build an addition to the building that maintains some of the historic character and the kind of architectural elements of the brick. And some of the other features there. And so they're working on a plan now. Hopefully they're getting started next year for 95 units of rental senior housing. So it'll be 60 plus, and it's also mixed income. So there'll be some affordable units in there, some workforce units, as well as market rate units in there, and some of the related sort of services and amenities that you would expect. And so those were the two, obviously, those two buildings going onto the tax rolls for the first time in decades, if not over 100 years. So that's one of the things that we try to do in economic development is grow the tax base, expand the pie to help keep the tax burden in check for all of our other taxpayers. So where you have these properties that are not on the tax rolls, not contributing, breathing new life into it, selling them and putting them onto the tax rolls is a big piece of that. And then in the background here, you can see the last kind of third civic building that we're continuing to work on is the Memorial Auditorium. So we haven't sold it yet, but we do have an agreement, a purchase and sale agreement with the Architectural Heritage Foundation out of Boston. They were the group that tackled the old City Hall in Boston. And so they are working on a sort of a mixed-use, multi-purpose space there. It's another very challenging building to undertake. And they just recently, I think, doubled down on that effort by hiring the city manager's former chief of staff. So now they have a dedicated project manager that's waking up every day trying to move that project forward, secure financial resources to make that project viable. So hopefully good news to come on that, and then we'll have kind of successfully figured out those 3 big civic buildings in Lincoln Square. The other one that I think I talked about last time I was here, and it was probably just getting started and is now wrapping up, is the former Performing Arts School. Also at one time was the YWCA at 6 Chatham Street. This is right up the hill from the Hanover Theater in our theater district. And so this is 24 units, all market rate housing. Also, again, some pretty interesting units there. You can tell it's another historic building. And one of the things that we really rely on are historic tax credit opportunities, because again, the financials of these projects can be pretty tough. And so getting those tax credits to the city, both from the state and the federal government, really make these projects viable. So those 24 units are done. They're actually hopefully going to be bringing them sort of into use and occupancy November 1st, so just around the corner. I believe they already have 11 of the 24 leased, and they have another 6 or 7 inquiries. So again, not even open yet and already kind of leasing up, so really showing the strength of the demand in the market and the need for these kinds of units. And that building had been sitting vacant for 20 years as well. Another, again, housing, this is kind of the theme for the beginning here, is housing production. The former Mount Carmel church site, obviously tragedy that the church came down, the diocese determined that they had to do that. So the diocese took it down a couple of years ago and then marketed it for sale. It has been purchased. I don't think they've closed yet, but they have a purchase and sale agreement that's wrapping up, and they have all of their planning board approvals, all of their financing lined up. To a group of Wood Partners. They have a Boston office, a Lexington, Mass office, but they're actually a national firm that does multifamily housing out of Atlanta, Georgia. And so their local team here in Massachusetts have put together a proposal. This is 371 units of market rate housing. And this is the corner of East Central Street. This is the kind of vantage point that you're looking at. And what they've tried to do, understanding there's been a lot of stakeholders in this site over the years, is they're going to be building a sort of memorial to the church sort of on the corner here. So at the corner of East Central Street and Mulberry Street, there's this kind of triangular area that'll be sort of a public space, and they'll put a memorial there. And then they're also creating a community room there that could be used for the Shrewsbury Street Neighborhood Association and the parishioners to kind of meet and talk about things. And that room, that community room, will be decorated with various kind of memorabilia and documentation and photos and things like that of the church's history. And then the other piece of it was the Little League that was there was on church land. And so they have contributed to the city $150,000 to help us relocate that Little League to another area in the neighborhood. So we're going to be working on that in the next year. And so that's another substantial size. This is about a $106 million investment into the city of Worcester. And again, you know, obviously it's a tragedy that the church came down. That was all 5 acres of tax-exempt property, not paying any taxes. They're going to be paying about, I think it's over $1 million a year in taxes. So again, trying to expand the pie, grow the tax base to do all the things we need to do locally. An update on Madison Properties. So Madison Properties is the private developer that we had an arrangement with for the Polo Park development. So not to get into all of the complexities of it, but the idea was the city took on debt service to build the ballpark through the Worcester Redevelopment Authority. And we have different income streams. So we get a lease from the team, we get parking revenues. I'm happy to say that this year our parking revenues exceeded our expectations, so we're looking good in that department. We have some level of shared sponsorship, not in the ballpark itself, but in some of the other areas, like if we do banners on the street poles or, you know, maybe a sign on the parking garage, we have some level of advertising share with the team. But then most importantly is the new taxes generated from the development will create a significant revenue stream for us to pay back the debt service on the ballpark. And so this is sort of the master plan, if you will. And so right now he is under construction. He broke ground at the end of August on his first residential building here. So it's at the corner of Madison Street and Washington Street on the other side of the street from the ballpark. And so that is, the first phase is 228 units of market rate housing with some retail as well as a parking garage. We are in the midst, you can't really see it from this vantage point, but we're wrapping up the public-owned parking garage that's across the street there. So that actually is hopefully going to be open in time for next week's Holy Cross football game. So Holy Cross is playing Colgate next week. It should be a sold-out crowd. and we're hoping to at least have a temporary certificate of occupancy to get folks the ability to park in the garage next week. And then the other elements, as you can imagine, were definitely impacted by COVID because you had a hotel, and so he is working on this still. There's going to be a hotel on this corner, but obviously hotels were very significantly impacted by COVID, so he's still committed to that. He's working on that. Hopefully might break ground in 2023. It's still kind of taking a while for hotels to get back to where they were at with occupancy, and there's still some uncertainty, as we know, with masks going on right now, and no beds in the hospitals, but he's still committed to that. The two pieces that he should be working on, I'll talk more about kind of later in the presentation when I talk about jobs and commercial investment, is this is a life sciences lab building, research and development here, and then he's also building commercial development here in left field. You can see if you've been to the Polar Park for a game, there's like the foundation is already built. So he has some underground parking that's already been built, as well as the foundation for that building, which is helpful because that gives him speed to market. So if he gets a tenant, he can build that a lot quicker and provide that space quicker. It's either going to be office, commercial office, or lab, depending on how he does with lease up of the lab building. He might do another lab building, or he might do a commercial office generally. But that's kind of what the status is of the private development around Polar Park that we had conceptualized 3 years ago. And then one thing that we didn't know about, but this is where some of the things that we had expected would happen, and further just helps us with sort of the overall financial picture for Polar Park, is we started working 3 years ago with Tabletop Pies because we knew that they would probably want to have a new location rather than having their headquarters right next to Polar Park. And we had worked with them on another facility 4 years ago in our South Worcester Industrial Park. And that new modern facility really gave them efficiencies of operation and already had them thinking about a new headquarters, even irrespective of the ballpark, because of that. So when you make about 150 million pies a year, if you can reduce your defect rate from 4% to 2%, that's several million pies. So he was already thinking about a new modern facility for his headquarters, and so that's under construction. I'll show you a picture of that. It's actually wrapping up now. But then he was put in touch with Boston Capital, another large-scale multifamily housing developer who will be purchasing the existing legacy site right next to Polar Park. And this is an idea of their sort of conceptual plan, master plan for the site. It's about 4 acres, and so what they're doing is a cluster of different buildings. They are going to be saving the historic, real oldest part of Tabletop right here at the corner with the pie store, and the pie store will stay there, the retail piece there. And then they hope to do commercial there, so probably, hopefully like a grocery store. They don't have anybody lined up yet, but see the need to continue the momentum of like the public market and add another grocery with all the housing that's coming online in the Canal District. We want to like make sure that people have the ability to walk to everything that they need and they don't need to get in their cars and drive to a grocery store somewhere else. So that's one of the visions that he has. And then all of these buildings here showing like that he wants retail on the first floor, which is what we like on an urban design element, is to have that pedestrian engagement, have that kind of those new small businesses, the goods and services and the amenities that they provide, but then doing housing above. And so each of these buildings would have housing above. The first one that they're taking on and have approvals from the planning board, you may have read about it, is this first building at the corner of Washington Street and Madison, so right across from the Madison Properties project I just mentioned. And this is going to be 83 units of affordable housing. So with all of the market rate housing, we want to make sure that we have a balance, have that mixed income approach to neighborhoods, and have everybody have the opportunity to live in the Canal District at affordable rents. So he's going to be building 83 units of affordable housing here. And then future phases will include market rate and workforce as well, but the first one he's tackling is affordable, and that should be getting started in 2022. So you'll see some construction activity. Tabletop is scheduled to be out of there by January, so then they'll move forward with prepping the site and doing some demolition activities. And then the other thing that we're excited about in terms of walkability and connectivity is that we're going to be working with them on reinstituting this public roadway here. This used to be a public roadway before Tabletop kind of built and patched onto their building over time. And so we're going to reinstitute that public roadway to create another connection point. So it would take you, like this is right at the entrance of the ballpark, and this is the entrance of Crompton Place as well as the public market. So another nice connection so you don't have to walk all the way around. And we actually just received word that we're getting a $1.2 million MassWorks grant for that. So the state has grant programs for infrastructure investments, and so we applied for a grant, and we've gotten $1.2 million to help us with the construction costs of reinstituting that public roadway there. Also wanted to mention, it's not just downtown, Canal District. There's development and investments happening throughout the city in most neighborhoods and every corner. So we continue to work with Botany Bay Construction, a known entity here in Worcester. They have a number of sort of senior housing as well as other housing projects in Worcester. They're tackling the old creative packaging site on James Street. Really challenging site, and so this is kind of what it will be. I think they've started to pour some of their foundations now if you drive by the site, and getting going on that. It's about 95 units or so of sort of townhouse style, again rental, not ownership but rental, but sort of that townhouse style similar to what they have off of June Street in Worcester. And so what's really significant about this, and the other thing we try to do, is really tackle these challenging sites that are really just a drag on the economic base of Worcester. So I'll show you what this site looked like before. It had a number of emergency response actions from EPA. This was a former industrial site, abandoned, they walked away from it. We foreclosed on it because they stopped paying their taxes. So then when we foreclosed on it, we did an RFP, a request for proposals, asking for somebody to take it on. They were the preferred developer, and then we also took advantage of some grants that we get from EPA through their brownfields program, knowing that the economics of doing something like this, to incur multiple millions of dollars of cleanup before you even get started with a construction project, is not easy to do. So we were able to do a $1.25 million low-interest loan with deferrals until they get their occupancy to help them with the cleanup costs, and that comes from a federal grant that we get from EPA. So really great transformation to that neighborhood. They've been complaining for years about the drag that property had on their neighborhood. And then again, in terms of mixed income and affordability, one that's wrapped up just last week. Well, they're still kind of working towards getting occupancy, but they had a celebration last week as they near the end of their construction. Our partners at Worcester Common Ground, a local nonprofit CDC, Certified Development Corporation, is doing this project at 126 Chandler Street. And it's a combination of historic preservation of that old building on the right side, as well as new construction on the left side. And they've also incorporated a urban garden, a greenhouse roof you can kind of see there, which will be really cool for the residents to be able to grow their own produce. And this is an affordable housing development, about 31 units. So that's a lot of housing, and so I'd say that because there's a lot in the pipeline, but we know, the governor and the lieutenant governor say we need several hundred thousands of more units in Massachusetts to continue to meet the demand, continue to maintain affordability, and continue to grow. Because obviously, when we think about job creation, and I'm going to get to that next, you need to have workforce. So everybody knows right now the struggles that employers are having with their workforce and getting folks into jobs. And so the more kind of people we have, the available workforce is going to make it more attractive for companies to locate in Worcester and throughout Massachusetts. And so one of those that we've been working on for several years now and really is taking off is this biomanufacturing park that we're working on with our partners at the Worcester Business Development Corporation. This is up near the UMass Med School and AbbVie. I know AbbVie was mentioned earlier. It's the former state hospital land. So again, 44 acres of tax-exempt land, just not contributing any taxes to the city, not producing anything because the state hospital has been closed for many years now, is being repurposed and really trying to complement what's been going on that corridor with the UMass Medicine Science Park, all of the research and development buildings they have there, the research that goes on their campus, and the students that they pump out in this industry. And so the first project under construction is Galaxy Life Sciences. They're building about 120,000 square feet, I think it is, and they're a developer, so they're going to lease this out to tenants, and they have a number of good conversations going on with tenants that will take this space. It's about, I think it's about a $50 or $60 million investment there. And then the other one that's been going on for a while, I actually took a pause and now it's jump starting again. This is right along Route 9. You can maybe see the construction fence right along Route 9. There's a company called Wuxi Biologics. They are based out of China, but they have a number of United States facilities. And so one of the reasons they took a pause was they originally got planning board approval and started construction on a 100,000 square foot building. And because of the demand they're seeing, everybody has probably heard about this in life sciences, in terms of pharmaceuticals and other kind of innovations happening in healthcare. They have increased this. This is their new rendering. They've doubled the size of the building. This is going to be 198,000 square feet. So these are just 2 of the 6 parcels available up there at that industrial park that we're building. And these two parcels is over $300 million of investment and should be somewhere between 300 and 400 jobs with the opportunity for more because we have a couple of other parcels up there that we're working with the WBDC on. So exciting stuff there. And then also Table Talk Pie, as I mentioned, this is their new headquarters. They're just about done with it. This is right near the Boys and Girls Club in Main South Worcester, so right on Gardner Street. And again, in Brownfields, this was, if people remember the old Astro building. Yeah, the old Astro building, vacant for a long time. Really just suffered from disinvestment, and so they cleaned up the entire site and obviously built this over the course of the last year during the pandemic, which is pretty impressive. And so they're getting ready to open that next month, and we're looking forward to that. And that's going to lead to, obviously, all of the jobs from the location next to the ballpark will come over here, and they're also going to create an additional 50 jobs there because of the expansion that provides. And then I mentioned briefly the two kind of commercial job creation components of Madison properties near the ballpark. So this is just the conceptual sort of renderings. The one on the left is the lab building across the street, as I mentioned, near the parking garage that's under construction now. And then the left field building. So hopefully we're going to see those two start. It's possible that they'll get started in 2022. We have some good momentum there. There's a lot of people chasing life sciences right now because of the growth that's experiencing. And Massachusetts is without a doubt #1 in the world for life sciences. So there's a lot of companies that want to be here. Access to talent, all the colleges and universities, our healthcare systems, all of those kind of support systems is really fueling that growth in Worcester and Massachusetts. The other thing I wanted to mention too, this is just kind of a site plan and I have a different rendering. It's under construction now, so if you go to the ballpark, if you went over the last month or so, you see some other things that are still kind of under construction. So one of the things that opened last month was what we call the Summit Street Terraces. So up in the outfield, there's a Wormtown vending location now, the duck boat, one of the old duck boats that was part of the 2004 World Series, as well as a new opportunity for Worcester food entrepreneurs and restaurateurs. It's called the Taste of Worcester, and so they'll get the support from the Worcester Red Sox catering to be able to go in there on a rotating basis to really get exposure to all of the fan attendees for their local restaurants that they're working on. And then there's also the old Sherwood Diner. So we've been trying to find a home for this old Sherwood Diner for the last 10, 20 years. It was in storage in Sutton. Blackstone Valley Chamber of Commerce, Jeannie Hebert and her team helped us save that when it was potentially going to be basically thrown away. And then the Worcester Red Sox Foundation purchased that, and so they've restored it. It looks really beautiful. It's out there in the outfield, and actually WXLO and Nash Icon is going to be doing broadcasting out of that diner. It can't be a fully functioning diner again. The health code regulations and all of that are too cumbersome. So it is going to have some cool use there. And then the last piece, like further out in the outfield, this is really kind of behind that left field building. And if you're coming like through under the Green Street Bridge and coming in that way, we don't want folks to have to walk all the way down Green Street and around that way. So this, if you can picture, this is Green Street right here. And so up here at the corner would be the bridge. And so if you came under, you could actually just walk through this new pedestrian plaza, this new gateway green space that we're creating to that back outfield ticketing entrance. And so that's under construction now. Most of the hardscape should be done by the end of this calendar year. We'll come back in the spring before the season starts with like the plantings and stuff like that. And then there's this concept that shows potential structure. So we are building a bathroom, but we also are going to be working with trying to identify a partner that might build, you can picture like these repurposed shipping containers, or maybe they do other kinds of architectural features to create, again, new activity, food and beverage kind of offerings there to kind of bring some life to it. And we're also going to be recreating as like an homage to the canal. There'll be a water feature here with a fountain. And so this is kind of a more of a street level person view of what that will look like. And so that'll be a nice element to add before the next season. And that's one of the things that the city manager's tried a lot about. Obviously, I focus a lot on, the bricks and mortar of things and all of that, but the city manager has a real focus on arts and culture and placemaking and trying to make a place like really interesting and inviting. And so we're doing that now. With the Main Street project, we reconstructed Main Street, and you'll see some public art elements get installed throughout the rest of this year. We're doing a thing for Major Taylor. We're also doing something for Abby Kelly Foster. We're doing something for Esther Howland. Esther Howland was a Worcester native that invented the commercial Valentine, and so there'll be an interesting thing to her. And then also a wrench bench. So the monkey wrench was invented in Worcester at the old Coe's Knife. near Mill Street, and so there'll be a bench that kind of looks like a wrench, so we call it the wrench bench. So those kind of things that like are interesting in public art, but also help tell the story of Worcester. And then further, here we want to try to increase the connection points of like downtown with the Canal District and Shrewsbury Street. So under that Green Street Bridge, we're also, before the next season, we'll have some new creative lighting under that bridge. So it'll make it a more inviting, a more comfortable walk for folks as people are parking downtown and walking that way, and hopefully just trying to increase that connection between downtown and Canal District. So trying to do some of those cool things at the same time. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about that. And then lastly, on the transportation front, as I mentioned, with the Worcester Redevelopment Authority role that I have, we own and operate Union Station. We have some exciting tendencies coming there. The Worcester Regional Food Hub should be putting their headquarters there. So they operate like a shared commercial kitchen, which is like an incubator for food entrepreneurs. So we're working with them to get them in the building. And then we also just completed a lease arrangement, and the bids just closed last week with MBTA. So MBTA is building what we call the center platform at Union Station. It's about a $70 million project. And that'll increase our ability, our capacity for commuter rail service, hopefully increase that heart-to-hub express train from Boston to Worcester. So really trying to grow not just like here within the city limits, but how do we relate to the kind of growth of the Commonwealth as a whole. And I think that'll be a really important connection, furthering our connection to Boston. And so that should be about a 2-year project, but they just closed bids on that. They'll probably be selecting a contractor, and they'll get started with that next. And then lastly, a couple of things I wanted to mention. So I also oversee our planning division, and so while there's a lot of great things happening, a lot of growth happening, we want to take a moment to kind of take a pause and look at the city from a planning perspective and make sure that we're growing in a smart, strategic, sustainable way. And so we just hired a consultant for what we call the term master plan. It's not really the term people like to use anymore. So we're doing a citywide long-range plan that will really look at like the built environment. So looking at zoning, looking at design kind of consideration of new buildings, looking at how that relates to transportation and all modes of transportation, walking, biking, vehicular. And so that process will go on over the next 2 years or so. But we just brought on the consultant to help us through that process to make sure that we're, again, growing in a really smart, strategic way. And that will complement, we had already done, people might have heard the Green Worcester plan, so really trying to focus on sustainability initiatives, and that will integrate with that. And then lastly, so the American Rescue Plan, the federal stimulus, we do have those dollars now in our sort of accounts, and so we're working, we did a number of community input sessions over the last couple of months to get community feedback about what they think are the greatest priorities facing Worcester, because we're getting about $146 million, which is a significant amount. And we won't see something like this again, I think, in our generation in terms of help from the federal government. And so we're now planning what are the best ways to spend these monies, whether it's on housing and infrastructure and small business assistance and green kind of sustainability initiatives. There's a variety of things included in that. And so we'll be submitting an additional recommendation, some information to City Council for their discussion in November about that. So I think it's a really interesting opportunity, a really huge opportunity for us, and especially if we can use these dollars that are, we wouldn't have otherwise to make smart investments for long-term impact. Because as you probably know, we have a lot of aging infrastructure, we have unfunded EPA mandates about clean water and all of those things that, it's tough to get to all of those things with just like a regular annual municipal budget. So I think this is going to provide a really great opportunity for us to tackle some of these things to have real good long-term impact for the city as we move into the next decade or so. So that's what I have for you. A lot of information kind of packed into one, but this is my contact information. But really curious if there's things that you're curious about, that you've heard about, because again, there's plenty more that wasn't really included in what I've talked about today. So interested in seeing if there's something that you were thinking about that I hadn't talked about.
What do you attribute the major growth in Worcester from?
I think it's a number of factors definitely coming together. I think it's we certainly benefit from our proximity to Boston. So Boston can't grow east, right? Because there's an ocean there. And so I think as it relates to that, we're seeing that kind of growth a little bit in the towns, Metro West kind of area. towns are not as development friendly or business friendly, so I don't think that they've been able to have the kind of housing production that we've been able to accomplish over the last 10 years. So I think that, the housing production for sure. And then also now with people kind of returning to cities, I think people want to live in a place that has an art museum, it has a DCU Center, it has the Hanover Theater, it has Polar Park. So I think we've had those kinds of quality of life kind of amenities that some other smaller towns don't. And we're seeing that employers also want to be there too, because they know that that's going to help them attract talent if they're in an area that's a great place that people want to live. So I think those things are good. And we've been trying to invest in other things. This is kind of a little bit outside of my area, but other things that are important to quality of life and just our public assets. So obviously South High just opened, so making investments in public education is critical. Doherty's underway right now. Burncoat will probably be next, which is why it's important we continue to grow the tax base, right, as we try to make these investments. And I think since the city manager came in 2014, they've invested something like $90 million in our public parks. So I think that's really helpful in terms of as you think about a neighborhood and what that neighborhood has to offer. We have, I think it's now 63 public parks in the city, so a lot of public parks. I think he's made a point to really try to invest in those areas. So I think those kinds of things that just contribute to an overall kind of quality of life, which is why I think that's particularly why I think we've separated from, maybe Providence and Hartford and some of those areas. Colleges and universities continue to do well. Obviously Becker was a unique situation, I think. They had certain circumstances there, but WPI is very strong. The med school is extremely strong. Mass College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences is doing well and helping with our downtown. So I think having the colleges and universities certainly also separates us from places like Lawrence or Lowell or New Bedford or Fall River. Having 9 colleges in the city is definitely an asset. So.
Are most of these people employed in Worcester, or they're
combination? You mean the people living here?
the new people that have moved in?
It's a combination. So one of the things that came out, there was a national report. I forget what the publication was. Might have even been like USA Today, but there was a national report just a few weeks ago about job growth in metro areas since the pandemic began, and Worcester was 12th on that list nationally. So we have been growing jobs here, so I think there's job opportunities here, but there's certainly folks that are commuting as well. Looking for the affordability that we provide with all of the kind of amenities you want out of a city and just 45 minutes to Boston. So I think it's a combination of the two.
Yeah. One of the problems that Worcester always faced, we had all the colleges, but the college students left the year, they didn't stay. Are you working with the colleges and letting them know what type of businesses are coming here so that they can maybe add different majors after school so that they attract the people and then they have a feeding program into the city? Yeah,
that's a good point. We definitely do that. I think we've seen that with some of the growth in the different degrees and specialties at WPI. So historically in engineering, kind of school that has pivoted and added some degrees in biotechnology and bioengineering because of the life sciences growth here in Worcester. And so I think that's one of the reasons why we pursue certain industries as well. As I mentioned, the biomanufacturing park that we're developing, we're trying to be smart about the industries that we're trying to recruit here. So there is that whole piece of it. I haven't talked a lot about the workforce development division that we have, but there are training programs and things like that to help get folks the skills needed, and not just the college students, but also just Worcester residents, the skills they need to take advantage of these jobs that are available in growing industries. One example, I think in terms of our next wave and what we might be able to capitalize on in that same theme would be robotics. So we don't have a lot of robotics companies, but I think with WPI, for all those same reasons, I think we could easily get some good job growth in robotics. But there have been, I think it's been twofold. I think there's been available jobs keeping the college students here, but I think again, all those quality of life things, I think college students are also visualizing this is a place I could stay and put some roots down after college, and I don't need to go to Boston. I mean, you look at the cost of that now. That was probably where our brain drain was going most, was probably to Boston, but now, a recent college graduate that might be making, 60, 70 grand a year in Boston to pay $2,000, $2,500 a month in rent, starting to not make sense for them to do that anymore. So I think that there's that element of it too.
I think the only thing, going forward is that the people, come, stay here or move here if they feel it's a safe environment too. As long as, the priority is the safety in the city and people can walk through all the districts and feel comfortable, I think that's going to be a key with all the development.
Yep.
Yeah, great presentation. So many parts trigger different thoughts in my mind. when you showed the picture of Union Station, I wonder, is the Columbus statue going to stay there?
There was a hot discussion about that last year at City Council, and it did not go anywhere.
Good. Yeah. And you mentioned Green Worcester. John Odell came.
That's right.
to speak
Oh, he
to
did?
us.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, and he talked about so many wonderful initiatives too that he's involved in.
Yep.
Homelessness. I don't see around Worcester a tent city like Mass and Cass and Worcester. I don't know if there are homeless people living in abandoned buildings. I'm thinking of the Worcester Cold Storage, the horrible tragic fire in 1999. Whatever happened to that building, and are there other derelict abandoned buildings like that that need to be addressed?
Yeah, so that's a good question. The cold storage building was demolished, and now we have the Grafton Street Fire Station in its place with the memorial to the Worcester Six.
Right.
There are some other buildings, actually, it's still owned by the same guy that owned that building. He's owned it for 20 years now. We've been heavily encouraging him to sell. There's a lot of people interested in those buildings, so it's like a cluster of mill buildings. Great opportunity for transit-oriented developments right there by Union Station, so I think we could see some movement on those properties soon. So we do try to tackle this. A lot of what I was talking about, some of the buildings were vacant at the time, so we've tried to, make the numbers work, if you will. Some of these have incentives or subsidies. Construction costs are really high right now. So while the growth is great in Worcester and the demand's there for housing, for example, we still need to help be creative with some of these folks to make the numbers work. So for example, we get federal funding for the affordability. So when you think of a mixed income property like the courthouse that has some affordable units in there, there's usually some government subsidy there. We also have a local and state tax program for market rate housing. So some of the larger market rate housing has been able to take advantage of that. And so it provides them a small sort of exemption on their local taxes once they make this investment and generate all those new taxes for the city of Worcester. It's kind of like, we can make the decision of getting 80% of $1 million a year or 100% of nothing. So we like to take the 80% of $1 million a year. And then they get an investment tax credit from the state as well. And all those things really help make the numbers work. And so the state's pushing more funds through that, through the ARPA money that they're getting. They're getting about $5 billion, and they're talking about $1 billion just for housing. Because again, we need this kind of support and these financial resources because construction costs, we've seen what happened with lumber, labor prices, all of that stuff, and we certainly want people to have good, well-paying jobs if they're building these facilities, but it starts to make the numbers challenging. And at the same time, we want to make sure that the rent is affordable, right? So we'd rather kind of tackle whatever subsidy is needed to offset the construction costs and make sure that rent's still maintained, because otherwise, if they didn't get any subsidy, they'd spend all this money building it, and then we'd have Worcester apartments going for $2,500, which our folks can't really afford either. So there's a lot of interesting kind of financial packages that these developers go through to try to pull that off. But to your question on homelessness, I didn't highlight it here, but and it's a kind of an interdepartmental approach. We do some stuff in our department, and then we have a Health and Human Services department as well, Dr. Castile, who does a great job. And so we work together internally as well as with community partners like Net of Compassion, Open Sky Community Services, Central Mass Housing Alliance, a number of folks, and it's all coordinated to really figure out how best to serve that population, connect with them, outreach workers out there in the community, on the streets, helping them connect with resources and shelter and housing. And so one of the things that my department plays a role in is getting them into housing. So we have a couple of projects underway right now. One is with the Worcester Housing Authority on Lewis Street, which is off of Southbridge Street. They're building 24 units of micro units to get them into stable housing. So that'll add to that. And then we also have sort of a tiny home village, which is kind of a model used in other parts of the country because of construction costs being where they are on Stafford Street. That's underway. So it's not under construction yet, but they're nearing all of the financing they need to pull that off, where they'll kind of have like a tiny home kind of village with oversight and services and all of that. And then our community partners do a great job in terms of getting them into healthcare and all those kind of wraparound services too. But it's a tough thing, and it's not, we're not alone in that. A lot of cities definitely face those challenges. So I think we're doing a pretty good job in trying to be creative and trying to get the resources out there. We were able to get a lot of resources from the CARES Act, the last federal package during the pandemic, that allowed us to open temporary homeless shelters. If you remember hearing about, we actually opened North High as a temporary homeless shelter because the kids weren't in school. We use some other facilities too, I'm forgetting which other ones, but yeah, there were some additional financial resources that helped us tackle the unique challenges that we had during COVID as well. But it's a tough issue. So I think we're doing what we can. For sure.
I'm not aware of any tent cities around the area.
No, not so much. No. I think I think because of the job we're doing, we haven't seen like getting overwhelmed like you'd see in like Seattle or LA. You know, certainly LA is unbelievable what's going on there. So.
Yeah, you mentioned Worcester Housing Authority. Alex Corrales was here last week.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So yeah, it's not done alone. Certainly, government can't solve that problem alone. So we're lucky we have a good kind of collaborative gene in Worcester, where government works really well with nonprofit sector, private sector, and really come together to really kind of just work together to solve those kind of challenging issues. So.
Thanks for your work.
Thank you. Before you go too far, Peter, as a thank you for being here today, we'd love to present you with our pennant distinction.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, my fellow Rotarians, that does it for today. No, it doesn't do it for today. You'd think by now I would get this, but
Next year you will.
yeah, right. No, I'm done. I've done this.
Oh.
All right, we have, hopefully not my number, 9537.
Oh, that's me.
Right. Go pick the winner.
All right. Let's go to your sleeve. Nope. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, good to see you. I have to run.
So what this
Bill
means.
maybe wanted me to say.
All right, the pot still grows. What is it at now, sir?
Almost $200.
Sweet deal. So as we go forth today, my fellow Rotarians, let us consider how we can serve to change lives, and of the things we think, say, and do. Consider these four things. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? And will it be beneficial to all concerned? And with that, I wish you a wonderful week, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Presentation.
It was a really good presentation.
So much going on.
Did you take off?